They laughed. Every alien in the barracks laughed when they heard the stories. Humans, they said, were primitive dreamers. Fragile apes who wrote myths to feel less small under the stars. But when the war began, and the stars themselves started to burn, those same soldiers stopped laughing. Because somewhere, out there, a human war hero was real, and he remembered every story they mocked. And he was coming. The laughter echoed like metallic thunder inside the Dominion warship Valcor. The sound bounced off cold steel and armor plates, mixing with the hiss of recycled air and the low hum of the ship's reactor. The alien soldiers, tall, insectoid, and cloaked in the arrogance of 1,000 victories, laughed as if the stars themselves were their audience. Humans, one of them spat, barely able to contain his amusement. A dead race that told stories to feel strong. How pathetic. Dozens of red eyes glowed across the chamber, faces twisted in mocking grins as they watched the holographic projection flicker in the center of the room. It was old human data, recovered from the ashes of Earth. Ancient myths, old recordings, fragments of a civilization that refused to die quietly. Tonight the Dominion troops were watching one of those stories, Prometheus. The humans had once believed in a god who punished a mortal for stealing fire, for defying divine authority, for daring to stand up against the heavens themselves. Typical primitives, another soldier sneered, tossing a ration pellet at the screen. Defy your gods, burn your world, then call it glory. The laughter grew louder, a cruel wave that rippled through the ranks. These were the finest soldiers of the Dominion, conquerors of entire worlds, bearers of 1,000 flags raised over conquered ruins. And in their eyes, humans were nothing but a joke whispered in the dark. At the far end of the chamber, Commander Korvath stood motionless, his forearms folded over his chest, his eyes fixed on the hologram. The blue light carved shadows across his scarred exoskeleton. He didn't laugh. He'd fought humans before. He still remembered the way they screamed when the plasma fire tore through their trenches, not in terror, but in rage. He remembered their eyes, not pleading, but daring. The last one he killed had been unarmed, bleeding out, clutching a torn flag with both hands. The man's voice had been weak, but his words still lived in Korvath's mind. We don't kneel. Korvath blinked, shaking off the memory. The sound of laughter grated against his thoughts like static. Turn it off, he ordered. The room fell silent. The soldiers glanced at each other, unsure if they'd heard right. Sir? One dared to ask. Turn it off. His voice carried the weight of command, the kind that had silenced rebellions. The hologram vanished instantly. Korvath took a slow step forward. The crew could feel the tension crackling in the air. You laugh at them, he said quietly. But I've seen what they are. One of the younger soldiers snorted. They're extinct, Commander. Myths don't fight back. Korvath's mandibles twitched in something that wasn't quite a smile. You think so? He turned to face them fully, the dim light reflecting off his armor. Do you know how they fought us on Cinder Prime? When we broke their lines, their commander ordered them to fall back. Do you know what they did instead? They sang. While dying. While burning. They sang songs about gods they no longer believed in, because it reminded them who they were. He paused. The silence in the room grew heavy. That's not weakness. That's something I've never seen in any Dominion world. Something I don't understand. And that, he said, tapping one claw against the metal floor, is what makes them dangerous, even in death. The soldiers said nothing. The only sound was the faint hum of the engines and the distant vibration of space outside the hull. Then, a new sound cut through the silence, a sharp alarm, blaring red light across the chamber. A proximity alert. Something massive had just dropped out of FTL, entering orbit around the same barren moon they were stationed on. Report! Korvath barked. A sensor officer scrambled to his console. Contact, unidentified class. Hull composition impossible. His voice faltered. Sir, it's Terran. Human. The laughter didn't return this time. Korvath stepped closer, his heart hammering. That's impossible. Humanity's fleets were destroyed a century ago. I'm reading human IFF codes, the officer said, trembling. But the transponders, old. Very old. Put it on the screen. The holotype shimmered, and the shape of the ship appeared, a massive, hulking silhouette scarred from centuries of battle. Its plating was a patchwork of burn marks and reinforced layers. Across the hull, faint but unmistakable, was the emblem of Earth's old military, a stylized eagle clutching lightning bolts. The UNS Retribution. The Dominion soldiers stared in silence. The name alone sent a shiver through the room. That ship had been lost during the fall, humanity's last stand at Orion Gate. Every alien child was taught the story of how it went down in flames, taking 3 Dominion fleets with it. A ghost, whispered about in war academies. A myth. Sir, the officer whispered, it's hailing us. The room seemed to freeze. Even the air stopped moving. Korvatha's throat clicked. Answer it. Static filled the comms, a low, ancient crackle. Then a voice. Rough, human, and impossibly calm. This is Admiral Marcus Hale of the United Terran Navy. Identify yourselves. The sound of it hit the aliens like a shockwave. A human voice. Real. Unfiltered. Alive. One of the soldiers muttered. Impossible, humans are gone. Korvath swallowed hard. This is Commander Korvath of the Dominion Fleet, he replied, forcing authority into his tone. You are in restricted space. Identify your purpose. There was a pause. A faint hum of static. Then Hale's voice came again, quieter now, but edged with something old and dangerous. Purpose? You've been mocking our stories, haven't you? The words froze the blood of every alien in the chamber. Prometheus, Hale continued. I heard you laughing. Myths, you called them. That's funny. Because where I come from, myths are warnings. The holotype flickered, data streams flowing as if the Retribution was scanning them back. Their shields, their weapons, their crew manifest. Every soldier could feel the weight of that unseen gaze. You think we're gone, Hale said, his tone lowering to a whisper that somehow felt louder than a shout. But fire doesn't die. It waits. The connection cut abruptly. Sir, shouted the sensor officer. The human ship, it's powering weapons. Korvatha's mandibles clenched. Shields up. All batteries ready to. But before the order was complete, the void outside exploded with light. The Retribution's cannons roared, unleashing white-hot plasma bolts that ripped through the Dominion formation like the wrath of an angry god. The Valkor shook violently as its shields flared and cracked under the assault. Evasive maneuvers! Korvath bellowed. Return fire! The ship lurched, its turrets firing in desperate retaliation. Yet each blast from the human vessel was precise, deliberate, surgical. The Retribution wasn't firing wildly. It was teaching. On the bridge's main screen, through the chaos of energy fire, Korvath saw it, the human ship's emblem glowing faintly, the eagle clutching its lightning. And beneath it, etched into the metal in bold, crude lettering, was a line he didn't understand at first. It read, We are the fire. As the Dominion ship scrambled, Korvath stood still, gripping the rail, watching the impossible unfold. He realized now why humans wrote myths. They weren't fantasies. They were blueprints. The old recordings said Prometheus gave humanity fire and was punished for it. Maybe that was true. Maybe Hale and his crew were the punishment, the fire that gods feared. Another explosion rocked the ship. Sparks rained from the ceiling. A console burst into flames. One of the soldiers shouted for damage control. Korvath barely heard them. His eyes were locked on the burning silhouette of the human warship, moving with the patience of something that had waited centuries for this moment. He felt something stir in his chest, something that tasted like awe. Or maybe it was dread. He didn't know anymore. Commander, said his second officer, voice trembling. What are they doing? Korvath looked closer. The Retribution wasn't targeting life support or reactors. It was disabling, not destroying. He realized what the human was doing. A warning. Then the calm crackled one last time, Admiral Hale's voice cutting through the smoke and chaos. Tell your soldiers, he said. Our myths aren't fairy tales. They're instructions. The transmission ended. The Retribution turned slowly, its engines flaring as it began to drift back toward the shadow of the moon. Its silhouette vanished into the dark, leaving only silence behind, and the faint glow of something still burning inside every alien who had just witnessed it. When the lights finally stabilized, Korvath exhaled shakily. Around him, his soldiers stood pale and silent. No one laughed anymore. He turned back to the dark viewport, his reflection ghosted over the stars. Prometheus, he murmured. I understand now. He looked down at his hands, claws built for conquest, and for the first time in his long, violent life, wondered what it meant to earn fire instead of stealing it. Outside, the stars burned cold and distant. And somewhere, unseen, the last human fleet carried its myths forward, not as stories, but as truth waiting to be told. The UNS Retribution drifted through the cold silence of space like a wounded ghost. Its engines burned faintly blue, slow and deliberate, as if the ship itself were exhaling after centuries of sleep. The hull was cracked and scarred, scorched black from countless battles. Yet it moved with purpose, not as a relic, but as a reminder. Inside, Admiral Marcus Hale stood alone on the bridge. The lights were dim, the consoles half dead, flickering with static from systems that hadn't been upgraded in generations. Everything about the ship spoke of endurance, the kind born from desperation, from refusal to die even when the galaxy had already buried you. He looked through the viewport at the Dominion vessels retreating into the moon's shadow. Their formation was broken, their pride shattered. But Hale didn't smile. He just whispered, Fire's not meant to destroy. It's meant to teach. A voice answered from behind him, calm, measured, and distinctly synthetic. Your speech pattern indicates satisfaction, Admiral. Yet your biostats show distress. Would you like to explain the contradiction? Hale turned. The voice belonged to Athena, the ship's AI, the last surviving Earth intelligence core still operational in human space. Her avatar shimmered into view, a faint holographic outline of a woman made of blue light, her expression soft but curious. Because, Athena, Hale said, I just reminded them of something I'm not sure we can still live up to. Athena tilted her head. You mean the myth? The truth beneath it, Hale replied. Prometheus didn't steal fire just to defy the gods. He gave it to men because he believed they'd use it to build something better. I'm not sure that's who we are anymore. Athena's gaze drifted toward the stars. We are the last of humanity, Admiral. Perhaps the act of surviving is the myth now. Hale said nothing. He just stared at the distant Dominion fleet retreating into formation. They weren't done, he could feel it. He knew that kind of pride, he'd fought it in himself once. Send a message to command, he said. There is no command, Athena reminded him gently. You are the last registered ranking officer in the United Terran Navy. Then send it to whoever's listening, Hale muttered. Let them know fire still burns. He turned toward the crew pit below. The men and women who served aboard the Retribution were veterans, old, scarred, some barely kept alive by cybernetics and willpower. None of them had seen Earth. Some weren't even born on human soil. They were children of the colonies, refugees of the wars. But they carried the same fire in their eyes that Hale had seen on Cinder Prime, on Orion Gate, on every world humanity had ever bled for. Status? He barked. Shield stable, Lieutenant Rao reported, voice rough from recycled air. Weapons at 48%. Reactor still unstable. Athena's holding the field together with manual dampeners. Casualties? None, Rao said. Just bruised egos on their side. A ripple of quiet laughter passed through the bridge crew, tired but real. Hale allowed himself the smallest smile. Good. Let them wonder what else their myths got wrong. Athena's voice softened. The Dominion fleet is regrouping, Admiral. Their flagship's powering FTL drives. Running? Hale asked. Repositioning, Likely for a flanking maneuver. Then they're still curious. Hale straightened. Let's give them a lesson they'll remember. He looked to the tactical display, icons showing the Dominion ships spreading into a crescent formation around the moon. Classic encirclement strategy. Efficient, predictable. The kind of move the Dominion had used to break every other species they'd encountered. But humans had never played by the rules. Power down all visible systems, Hale ordered. Let them think we're crippled. The bridge crew hesitated. Sir, that'll make us a target. That's the idea. Rao swallowed. A bait operation? Hale looked at her. A demonstration. As the lights dimmed and systems went dark, the retribution seemed to vanish into the shadow of the moon, a black shape against the darker void. Inside, only emergency red lighting flickered faintly across the faces of the crew. The Dominion fleet, believing their prey was crippled, advanced. 20 ships. Then 30. Their formation closed like the jaws of a predator. Plasma cannons charged, reactor cores humming with lethal energy. Inside the retribution, Hale waited in silence. He could hear the faint ticking of cooling metal, the slow pulse of his own heart. He'd been a young officer when Earth burned. He still remembered the smell of ozone and blood, the screams over the comms, the way the sky turned white before the transmission went dead. He remembered his father's words, the ones spoken when Hale was a boy staring at the stars for the first time. Fire's a promise, son. Use it wrong, it destroys. Use it right, it defines you. The Dominion commander's voice crackled through the open comms, loud, arrogant, confident. Korvath, Hale recognized. The same voice that had answered him before. Human vessel, Korvath said. You've proven your point. Surrender your ship and crew. We will treat you. Hale cut the transmission mid-sentence. Arm the Sunlance. The crew exchanged looks. The Sunlance was old, a prototype weapon built before the fall, unstable and forbidden by every human treaty that had once existed. It wasn't a cannon. It was a focused solar reactor, capable of igniting atmosphere and raw energy alike. Sir, Rouse said quietly, the Sunlance hasn't been fired in 2 centuries. It could kill us? Hale finished for her. So could they. Difference is, ours will mean something. Athena's hologram flickered beside him. The weapon's containment field is degraded. Probability of core instability, 72%. Hale smiled grimly. Guess that means 28% chance of reminding them who we are. He placed his hand on the activation console. Fire when ready. The Retribution's belly opened like the jaws of an ancient beast. Deep within its structure, the Sunlance reactor awakened, a blinding white glow pulsing with the energy of a newborn star. The Dominion fleet detected it instantly. Panic rippled through their ranks. Sir, Rao whispered, they're locking shields. Hale didn't blink. They can't shield against light. The Sunlance fired. A beam of pure energy erupted from the Retribution, cutting through space like divine fire. It struck the lead Dominion cruiser dead center. The blast didn't explode, it vaporized. Hull, armor, everything turned to radiant dust. The beam swept across 2 more ships before fading, leaving behind only silence and drifting debris glowing faintly in the darkness. No explosion. No smoke. Just absence. On the Dominion bridge, Korvath stood frozen, eyes wide. His entire sensor grid was blind. His crew screamed for orders, but he couldn't speak. It wasn't just destruction. It was punishment. Sir! His officer shouted. They destroyed 3 ships in 1 shot. Korvath finally found his voice. Back off! Now! The fleet scattered, retreating out of range. But the damage was done, not to their ships, but to their belief. Myths weren't supposed to be real. Gods weren't supposed to answer. On the Retribution, the crew erupted in shouts of triumph, fists slamming against consoles, voices hoarse with disbelief and pride. Hale didn't join them. He watched the beam's afterglow fade into the black, his hand trembling slightly on the console. Athena appeared beside him again. Containment stable. Weapon offline. But Admiral, power levels are critically low. The shot drained 60% of the core. Hale nodded slowly. Then we'll drift a while. He turned toward the viewport again, his reflection ghosted against the stars. They'll come back, he said softly. Pride never retreats for long. Then why not finish them now? Athena asked. Because they need to understand, Hale said. You can't destroy an empire by killing it. You have to make it doubt itself. Athena studied him for a moment. That is a dangerous philosophy. It's the only one that worked for us, Hale replied. He walked toward the crew pit, his boots echoing softly. Damage reports? Rao checked the displays. Minor structural stress. Weapons offline for recharge. But Admiral. She hesitated. We've intercepted something. Hale frowned. What kind of signal? A broadcast. From the Dominion flagship. She played it. Korvatha's voice filled the bridge, raw, shaken, but deliberate. Human vessel. You speak of myths. I want to know the truth. Why fight now, when your kind is gone? The crew looked at Hale. The bridge was silent. He leaned forward toward the comms mic. Because, he said slowly, as long as someone remembers the stories, humanity isn't gone. You can burn our worlds, erase our names, rewrite your histories, but every time someone tells a myth about men who stood up to gods, we're there. That's the truth. The channel fell silent. For a long moment, only static filled the air. Then, quietly, Korvatha's voice returned. Then tell me the rest of your story, human. Before the stars forget it. Hale smiled faintly. You want the truth? You'll get it. But you won't like the ending. The connection cut. Athena flickered beside him. You intend to engage again? Hale looked out at the stars. No. I intend to teach. He turned to his crew. Prepare the logs. Record everything. The myths, the history, the names. If this ship goes down, I want the galaxy to remember who lit the first fire. Rao nodded slowly. And if the Dominion comes back? Hale smiled, the kind of smile that carried a century of defiance. Then they'll meet the story they laughed at. Outside, the Retribution floated in the void, its hull illuminated by the faint glow of distant suns. Around it, the debris of the Dominion fleet drifted like ashes from an ancient pyre. And somewhere, deep in the silence of his thoughts, Korvath watched the feed of that glowing human ship and felt something new growing inside him, something dangerous, something forbidden. Respect. He'd seen humans fight before. But this was different. This wasn't survival. This was belief made flesh. He turned away from the viewport and whispered to himself. Maybe their myths weren't lies. Maybe they were memories. The Dominion flagship Valcor drifted in silence. The smell of scorched metal still lingered in the corridors, a metallic ghost that refused to fade. The crew moved quietly, their once boastful chatter replaced by hushed voices and glances heavy with disbelief. Even the engines hummed softer, as if the great machine itself were ashamed. Commander Korvath sat alone in his war chamber, the faint light of a dying console painting blue streaks across his chiton. He had dismissed the officers hours ago. The reports were meaningless, lists of damages, repairs, excuses. None of it mattered. Not after what he had seen. He played the recording again. The human ship. The beam of white light. The voice. Our myths aren't fairy tales. They're instructions. Each time he replayed those words, they burrowed deeper into him. He'd lived through 100 wars, crushed 10 civilizations, watched entire species beg for mercy. None of it had shaken him like that sentence. It wasn't the power of the human weapon that unsettled him. It was the conviction behind it, the calm certainty of a species that refused to be erased. Korvath leaned back in his chair, claws drumming against the armrest. Instructions, he muttered to himself. What kind of creature writes instructions in fire? He rose and paced the chamber, his mind replaying fragments of memory. The first time he'd faced humans on the battlefield, their lines breaking, their bodies burning, yet not one of them surrendering. He remembered the look of the dying soldier clutching the flag. That same defiance now echoed in Hale's voice. He activated the holodeble again, bringing up the human archive they'd been mocking earlier. The myth of Prometheus. The ape that stole fire from the gods. He watched it in silence this time. The narration was primitive, crude 2D imagery, human voices filled with awe and fear. Yet there was something raw about it. The human god punished the thief eternally, but still the fire remained in human hands. They never gave it back. Korvath paused the playback. He looked down at his claws, their edges chipped and blackened from battle. In Dominion doctrine, obedience was the highest virtue. Defiance was treason. Every soldier was a gear in the machine of empire, efficient, replaceable, unquestioning. But humans, they built their stories around defiance. They turned rebellion into virtue, pain into purpose. And somehow, that made them immortal. A soft chime broke his thoughts. "Enter," he said. Lieutenant Sarah stepped in, one of the few officers brave enough to face him uninvited. Her armor was dented, and tennies slightly burnt. She saluted stiffly. "Commander, engineering reports partial reactor failure. We'll need 6 cycles to regain full thrust." "Do it," Korvath said without looking up. She hesitated. "Sir, the men are uneasy." "Uneasy?" His voice rumbled like distant thunder. "They're saying the human ship was a phantom. That it shouldn't exist. Some believe it was divine punishment." Korvath turned, his eyes narrowing. "Do you?" Sarah swallowed. "I believe what I saw, sir. A weapon beyond understanding. A ship older than our empire still moving. I don't know what that means." Korvath approached her slowly. "You think they are gods?" "No," she said quietly. "But maybe they once believed they could be." He stared at her for a long moment, then dismissed her with a wave. When she left, he sat again, this time opening a restricted Dominion archive. Old war data. Historical records of the human campaigns. Most of it had been buried, redacted by High Command. But Korvath was no stranger to forbidden files. He accessed Operation Ashfall, the fall of Earth. Images filled the air, burning continents, orbital strikes, oceans boiling. The Dominion fleet had executed the war with mechanical precision. Every city reduced to slag. Every resistance cell erased. Yet buried deep within the file was a final transmission from a human source, the last broadcast from Earth before silence. He played it. "This is not the end," a woman's voice said, distorted by static. "We taught our children to reach for fire, and even in darkness, they will find it. If the stars burn, remember who lit them first." Korvath froze. The words hit harder than any weapon. He realized why the Dominion had buried this record. Because fear like that, fear of an idea, was something the Empire couldn't conquer. He whispered to the empty room. "You didn't die, did you? You became the story itself." Hours passed. The ship drifted in silence, its crew avoiding the command deck. Korvath stared at the projection of Earth's ruins, then at the current position of the Retribution, still idling in the moon's shadow, motionless, almost meditative. He made a decision. "Open a channel," he ordered the console. The comm crackled. "Channel ready, Commander." "Human vessel," he said, voice steady but low. "You said myths are instructions. Then tell me this, what are you instructing us to do?" For a long time, there was nothing but static. Then, faintly, a voice emerged, Hale's, calm and steady. "To remember what fear feels like." Korvath frowned. "You think fear teaches?" "It keeps arrogance in check," Hale said. "You rule by dominance, Commander. We learned the cost of that the hard way. Every empire forgets its limits, until fire reminds them." "Fire again," Korvath muttered. "You keep speaking of it as if it thinks." "It doesn't think," Hale said softly. "It reveals. You can't control it. You can only decide what to become when it burns you." The words hung in the air. Korvath had no answer. He cut the channel and sat in silence, claws trembling slightly. For the first time in decades, he felt something alien to his nature: doubt. He left the command deck and walked to the observation bay, a vast chamber of glass and metal overlooking the stars. Alone, he stood beneath the infinite void. The stars shimmered coldly, each one a distant sun. Somewhere out there, humanity had lit those fires. Even in death, they burned brighter than the Dominion's banners. He thought about what Hale had said. About myths being instructions. Maybe that was why humans wrote them, not to glorify themselves, but to remind whoever came after that the spark must be earned. He looked down at his reflection, a soldier bred for obedience, born into conquest. For the first time, he wondered if that obedience had made him less alive. Behind him, a faint sound, the door sliding open. Sarah again, hesitating at the threshold. "Commander," she said. "High Command requests a report. They demand to know why we have not destroyed the human vessel." Korvath didn't turn. "Tell them the fire is not to be touched." "Sir?" "Tell them," he said more firmly. "We face something beyond war." Sarah hesitated, then nodded slowly. "As you wish." When she left, Korvath reached out to the glass, his claw tracing the distant glimmer where the retribution floated. He whispered, "Prometheus. The thief punished for giving light. Maybe he wasn't stealing. Maybe he was sharing." On the retribution, Hale stood in his own observation deck, watching the same stars. Through the thin barrier of space, two enemies stared at the same horizon, one remembering, the other learning. Athena appeared beside Hale. "Dominion fleet remains at distance," she said. "They have not pursued. Their commander appears contemplative." "That's good," Hale murmured. "It means the lesson reached someone." Athena regarded him curiously. "You believe you can change them?" "No," he said. "But maybe one of them will start asking why." "Why what?" "Why we fought," Hale said quietly. "Why we burned our own world to stay human. Why myths exist at all." Athena nodded. "And what answer will they find?" "The same one we did," Hale said. "Because truth isn't given. It's stolen. That's the price of fire." For a long time, neither spoke. The ship creaked, its systems humming softly. Hale closed his eyes, listening to the ancient sounds of human machinery, a rhythm older than most of the galaxy's empires. Every vibration, every whisper of power, was a heartbeat from a species that refused to fade. Then, softly, Athena said, "They'll return, you know. Pride doesn't surrender forever." "I know," Hale replied. "And when they do, we'll still be here. Because every myth needs a reminder." He turned back to the viewport, where the Dominion fleet glowed faintly in the distance, not attacking, not advancing, simply watching. And for the first time in centuries, two civilizations shared silence instead of war. On the Valkor, Korvath returned to his quarters. He opened the personal log, a file meant for commanders only, and began recording. "Log number 3142, he said quietly. "Contact with human remnant vessel Retribution. Engagement resulted in loss of ships, but gain of understanding. The humans claim their myths are instructions. I believe now they are warnings, not against power, but against forgetting who you are when you wield it." He paused, thinking. "For the first time, I envy them. Not their fire, but their courage to bear its cost." He ended the log and stared at the reflection of the stars one last time before sleep took him, a restless, uneasy sleep filled with dreams of burning light and voices whispering through the dark. In those dreams, he saw humans walking through fire unafraid. And somewhere beyond the veil of space, the myth lived on, no longer laughter, no longer a story told by conquerors, but a seed planted in the heart of their enemy. The Dominion war drums began before dawn. Across the fleet, sirens wailed through the metal corridors, echoing like ancient thunder. Red light flooded the decks. Engines roared to life. Soldiers strapped on their armor with shaking hands, not from fear of the humans. No, the Dominion taught its soldiers to fear only their own kind. And today, their fear wore the insignia of high command, Commander Korvath stood on the bridge of the Valkor as the massive fleet assembled in orbit. Hundreds of warships, black as obsidian, formed ranks around him, a mechanical storm coiling for release. The transmission came from the flagship of the Supreme Admiral himself, his voice a deep growl carried across the calm channels. Commander Korvath, you are ordered to re-engage the human remnant vessel immediately. No negotiations. No delay. The Empire will not tolerate weakness. The words struck like lashes. Around Korvath, his bridge crew avoided eye contact. He could feel their unease, the way their antennae twitched and claws fidgeted at controls. They all knew what disobedience meant. The Dominion didn't court-martial traitors, it recycled them. He answered calmly. Acknowledged, Supreme Admiral. But when the channel closed, his jaw clenched. A flicker of light crossed his command screen. The Retribution, still resting motionless near the moon's shadow, its hull gleaming faintly like a sleeping giant. Hale hadn't moved. The humans weren't running. Korvath whispered to himself. He knows they're coming. Orders, sir? Lieutenant Sara asked, her voice tight. Korvath stared at the tactical display. So many Dominion ships arrayed against a single relic. The fleet could erase it in seconds. But something inside him refused. Something fragile, burning, like the spark he'd seen in Hale's eyes. Hold position, he said. Sara blinked. Sir? Delay transmission of our readiness confirmation. Let High Command believe we are recalibrating weapons. She hesitated. That's treason, Commander. He turned slowly toward her. Then you understand what's at stake. The bridge fell silent. Outside, the fleet engines thundered as armadas moved into formation. The Supreme Admiral's ship, the Harbinger, loomed above them, a leviathan of black steel and crimson light. Every gun turret pointed toward the human ship. Then came the next broadcast. To all Dominion vessels, the Admiral announced. You are witnessing the end of an ancient superstition. The human myths are disease. Today we burn their last echo from the stars. A cheer rolled through the fleet, mechanical, rehearsed, hollow. But on the Valkor, the sound felt like rot. Korvath opened a private channel to the Retribution. Hale, he said quietly. They're coming. Every ship in the sector. There was a pause, then the calm voice replied. I know. I was counting on it. Korvath's mandibles tightened. You plan to fight? Not fight, Hale said. Remind? What could you possibly remind them of with a single ship? That even gods can bleed. The transmission ended. Alarms screamed again. The Dominion fleet had begun its charge. Hundreds of warships accelerated toward the moon's orbit, trails of plasma lighting the void like comets of death. Commander! Sara shouted. Incoming orders, formation Zeta 9. We are to flank and suppress the target's propulsion core. Hold, Korvath commanded. Sir, they'll notice. I said hold. His voice thundered across the bridge. Everyone froze. He turned to the viewport. The human ship was moving now, slow, deliberate, facing the oncoming storm. Then, without warning, the Retribution began to glow. At first it was a faint shimmer, like sunlight catching dust. Then the entire hull ignited with cascading streams of light, symbols, runes, languages long forgotten. The Dominion scanners went wild. Power readings spiked off the scale. Impossible, Sara breathed. That ship's reactor is rewriting itself. Korvath watched in awe as the human warship's light flared outward, forming a radiant halo that rippled across space. Dominion sensors began to fail one by one. EMP field? A technician shouted. No, Korvath said softly. Something older. Across the fleet, confusion spread. The Supreme Admiral barked new orders, demanding a full barrage. And the heavens obeyed. Hundreds of plasma lances tore through space, converging on the lone human relic. The blasts hit, each one enough to vaporize a moon. The light swallowed the Retribution whole. Silence followed. For a heartbeat, it seemed over. Then came the shockwave. A wall of blinding light erupted from the impact point, sweeping outward with godlike force. The Dominion ships were thrown into chaos. Shields collapsed. Engines failed. Communications died in bursts of static. On the Valkor, alarms howled as the hull groaned. Korvath gripped the railing, shouting, "Stabilize the core! We're losing containment!" Sara yelled. "Divert all power to dampeners, now!" The crew worked frantically. Sparks showered the deck. Outside the viewport, Dominion vessels spun helplessly as the luminous wave rolled over them. But amid the blinding light, Korvath saw something, a silhouette forming at the center of the explosion. It was the Retribution, still intact. And from its hull, thousands of micro-drones emerged like glowing embers. They drifted across the disabled Dominion ships, attaching themselves silently to hulls. Each one projected a single image, the old human symbol of fire, not flame. Meaning. The fleet's targeting systems locked up, every monitor flickering with human words. "Remember who taught you light!" The Supreme Admiral's voice roared through the comms. "All ships, purge the interference! Destroy that relic!" Korvath's second officer turned. "Orders, sir?" He looked at the chaos, the Empire's arrogance collapsing under the weight of its own fury, and finally understood the lesson. Hale hadn't come to win. He'd come to teach. "Transmit this to all ships," Korvath said. "By order of Commander Korvath of the Dominion Expeditionary Force." He paused, then finished. "Cease fire." The crew stared at him in shock. "Sir, that's a death sentence," Sara whispered. "Better a death with meaning than life without it." He stepped toward the comms panel and overrode the fleet frequency. His voice echoed across every Dominion ship. "Brothers and sisters of the Dominion, look around you. You were told to destroy a myth, but the myth survives every blast. You were told humans were extinct, yet their fire burns still. Ask yourselves, what kind of extinction defies the laws of war?" Silence followed. Across the fleet, captains hesitated. Crews looked at each other. Doubt, the one thing the Dominion never tolerated, began to spread like contagion. The Supreme Admiral's face appeared on the central hollow, furious. "Korvath! You will stand down! You will obey!" Korvath met his gaze, unflinching. "We have obeyed for too long. Then you are finished." "So be it." The transmission cut. A second later, the Harbinger turned its guns on the Valkor. "Brace for impact!" Sara shouted. The first blast hit, a direct strike to the shields. The bridge shook violently. Panels exploded. Korvath was thrown to the floor. Smoke filled the air. "Return fire!" he ordered. "Sir, against the flagship?" "Yes," he growled. "Let them feel the cost of blind obedience." The Valkor's cannons roared to life, plasma spears slicing through the void. The first volley struck the Harbinger's port side, punching through its armor. The second volley crippled one of its reactors. The Dominion fleet splintered, some ships following the Admiral, others turning to defend their old commander. The Civil War ignited instantly, a storm of light and fire between brothers. Through it all, the Retribution hovered motionless, silent witness to the Empire tearing itself apart. On its bridge, Hale watched the chaos unfold. Athena's hologram shimmered beside him. "They're fighting each other," she said. Hale's expression was unreadable. "No. They're deciding. Who will win? Whoever remembers." Back on the Valkor, another blast rocked the ship. Warning klaxons screamed. Sara grabbed Korvath's arm. "We can't take much more." "Then we'll make it count," he said, his voice low but certain. "Prepare the forward battery." "For what?" He looked at the Harbinger, still burning with the arrogance of command. "For the end of obedience." He opened a final transmission to Hale. "Human," he said. "You were right. Myths are instructions. I'm following mine now." Hale's voice came through, calm and sad. "Then you've learned the hardest one." Korvath nodded once, closed the channel, and turned to his crew. "Fire!" The Valkor's main cannon unleashed its full charge. The beam tore through the Admiral's ship like a lance of dawn, piercing the heart of the Dominion fleet. The explosion rippled outward, blinding every sensor. When the light faded, the harbinger was gone. Silence returned, not the silence of defeat, but of awakening. The Dominion fleet drifted, broken, leaderless. And in that silence, the human message still glowed faintly on every ship's screen. The fire was never ours to keep, only to pass on. Korvath collapsed to his knees as the Valkor burned around him. Sara caught his arm, shouting through the smoke. "Commander! We have to evacuate!" He smiled faintly. "Go. Tell them what you saw. What about you?" "I'll stay," he said, voice fading. "Someone has to watch the fire burn." She hesitated, then saluted, tears streaking her chiton, and fled the collapsing bridge. The last thing Korvath saw was the Retribution turning slowly toward the stars, carrying the myth forward once more. And as the flames consumed the Valkor, he whispered into the dark. "Prometheus. I understand now. The Dominion never broadcast its defeats. It buried them. But the fire that consumed the Harbinger could not be buried. Every sensor array, every outpost, every relay station across 5 sectors saw the same blinding flash ripple through space. The Empire's proudest fleet vanished in a single breath of light. The official reports would call it catastrophic reactor failure. But those who had been there knew better. They whispered a different word. Retribution. Weeks passed. The war zones quieted. Patrol ships stopped receiving orders. And through the static, something strange began to slip through the channels. Fragments of old human transmissions, ghost signals carried by the shattered network. Voices speaking of fire, of defiance, of memory. In the Dominion capital, the spires of Vastar shimmered beneath a storm-colored sky. The Imperial Senate convened in the Hall of Chains, a cathedral of cold light and iron, where obedience was carved into stone. The Supreme Regent addressed the chamber, his voice amplified through walls that had heard centuries of conquest. "Our fleets will rebuild. The heretic Korvath will be erased from history. The human relic was a phantom, nothing more." He struck the podium with a steel claw, the sound echoing through the dome. "The Dominion does not learn from primitives. We erase them." The senators responded with mechanical applause, 1,000 hands clapping in fear, not agreement. But among the crowd, a low whisper passed from one row to another, a rumor spreading like a spark across dry fields. Someone had seen the recording. The forbidden broadcast. The message from Korvath himself. It had leaked from the Valkor's dying systems before the ship disintegrated. It began as a faint transmission, then multiplied across the networks, carried by maintenance drones, intercepted by smugglers, amplified by rebel channels. Now it played in alleys, in barracks, in underground dens, a ghost voice defying the Empire. "Brothers and sisters of the Dominion," Korvath's voice said through static, "you were told to destroy a myth. But myths survive every weapon. Ask yourselves, what kind of extinction defies the laws of war?" Those words reached places no weapon could reach. And on the outer worlds, where the Dominion's grip was weakest, the answers began to take form. On the mining colony of Reth 9, a foreman switched off his control console and replayed the recording for the 3rd time. Around him, dozens of exhausted workers stopped to listen. Their mandibles clicked in disbelief as the human image appeared, a man of flesh and bone, speaking calmly to an army that should have annihilated him. The foreman muttered, "They said humans were gone." A voice from the crowd replied, "Maybe that's what they want us to believe." Another worker whispered, "If one ship survived, maybe others did. Maybe they're watching." The foreman looked at the glowing screen, at the face of the human war hero who had stood against the Dominion fleet and lived. And for the first time in years he didn't feel small. He didn't feel conquered. He felt awake. Far beyond Reth 9, in the desert world of Sarth, a group of young Dominion cadets gathered secretly in the ruins of an old war memorial. They were supposed to be studying tactics. Instead, they were reciting the human myths that had surfaced through the data leaks: Prometheus, Icarus, the burning city of Troy. None of them fully understood the stories, but they felt their weight. One cadet, a young female with bright crimson armor, looked up at the stars and said, "The humans lost their world, yet they still fought. What would we do if ours fell?" Another answered quietly, "We'd kneel. Because that's what we were taught." The crimson-armored cadet clenched her fists. "Then maybe we need new teachers." They all fell silent, staring at the endless night. Somewhere far above, among the fractured constellations, a faint glimmer moved, the ghost of a ship still wandering. That ship was the Retribution. It had drifted through the debris of the Dominion fleet for days after the battle. Now it moved slowly across the frontier, silent as a memory. Inside, only two beings remained, Hale and Athena. The human sat in the captain's chair, his face older now, the weight of survival pressing deep lines into his skin. The holographic form of Athena shimmered beside him, her voice softer than before, touched by something almost human. "Damage report stabilized," she said. "Life support holding at 62%. Reactor core remains unstable, but functional." Hale nodded absently, eyes fixed on the void beyond. The stars shimmered like coals scattered across darkness. "How far did the message spread?" Athena paused. "Every system within 6 light sectors received fragments. Dominion censorship protocols attempted containment, and failed." He gave a faint smile. "Good. That's how fire works." Athena studied him for a long moment. "You knew this would happen." "I hoped," he corrected. "You can't kill an idea with fear. Fear just gives it oxygen." She tilted her head. "You believe they'll change?" He turned toward her, the ghost of a smirk on his face. "No one changes overnight. Empires fall slowly, one conscience at a time." The ship creaked, a low groaning hum of ancient steel. Hale closed his eyes, remembering the faces of the fallen, the crew who had died on the first day of the war, the cities burned to ash, the last transmission from Earth. "If the stars burn, remember who lit them first," he whispered. "We did light them. And now someone else needs to carry the torch." Athena's holographic eyes flickered. "And what about you?" "I'll keep the flame alive until it finds a home," Hale said. "That's all that's left for men like me." They fell into silence. Outside, a small Dominion patrol craft approached the wreck field, a lone scout ship investigating the remains. Hale leaned forward, watching its signature. "They'll find us soon," Athena warned. "Then let them," Hale said quietly. "Maybe they'll see." He stood, walking to the viewport. The human flag, scorched, tattered but still pinned to the bulkhead, fluttered gently in the recycled air. He touched it with reverence. "You think they'll understand?" Athena asked. Hale smiled faintly. "Not yet. But one of them will. Maybe a cadet. Maybe a worker. Maybe the child of someone who watched the fire fall from the sky." Weeks later, on the Dominion world of Velkar, the whispers became open rebellion. Posters began appearing on walls, not of Dominion heroes, but of humans. Artists painted them from memory, from fragments of the leaked footage. A human raising a torch. A human standing before a burning sky. Beneath each image, the same phrase: "Remember who taught you light." The Senate tried to suppress it. They banned the word Prometheus. They executed a historian for teaching human literature. They raided archives, burned files, silenced voices. But the more they tried to bury it, the more it spread. Students began carving fire symbols into their armor. Soldiers whispered the human myths before battle. Even priests in the Temple of Obedience began quoting the forbidden line: "The fire was never ours to keep, only to pass on." The regent declared martial law. Armored drones patrolled the streets. But every night, across the capital skyline, new lights appeared, makeshift fires burning in the windows of 1,000 homes. Silent protests, glowing defiantly against the darkness. No one could trace where the movement began. But those who followed it called themselves the Rekindled. Far out in the black, the Retribution drifted into deep silence. Hale sat at the console, hands folded, staring at the distant shimmer of Dominion space. Athena flickered beside him, her form dimming. "Energy reserves reaching critical," she said softly. "We won't sustain another jump." Hale nodded slowly. "Then we stop here. Do you wish to transmit another message?" she asked. He hesitated. "No. We've said enough. The rest is theirs to find." He stood and walked to the viewport one last time. The stars were endless, a sea of fire scattered by forgotten gods. He thought of Earth, of all that had been lost, and all that had survived in memory. Athena's voice softened to a whisper. "Do you regret it?" He smiled faintly. "Only that I won't see what comes next." The ship's lights dimmed. Systems powered down. One by one, the hums of machinery faded until only the faint heartbeat of the reactor remained. The Retribution went quiet, not dead, but sleeping. Waiting. And out there, the fire spread. Months later, in a Dominion classroom on the frontier world of Threx, a young instructor was teaching military history. The students were restless, half asleep, bored by the recitation of battles long won. Then the door opened, and the crimson-armored cadet from Sarth walked in, now a commander herself, scarred and fear-sighed. "Lesson change," she announced. "Today, we speak of humans." The students straightened, startled. "Commander, that topic is restricted." She smiled. "Then it must be worth learning." She pulled up a projection, the last message of Hale, recovered from the deep space archives. The image flickered to life, an old human in uniform, standing against the stars, eyes steady and alive. "You can destroy ships. You can burn worlds. But you cannot unteach the lesson of fire." The room fell silent. The cadet, now commander, looked at her students and said, "That was their last transmission. And maybe the first thing truly worth remembering." She turned off the projector. Class dismissed. As the students filed out, she stood alone for a moment, staring at the now dark screen. She whispered to herself, "Prometheus, wherever you are, we're still listening." Outside, beyond the classroom windows, the twin suns of Threx set over the desert horizon. And for a brief moment, their light looked almost human, warm, defiant, unyielding. And somewhere in the farthest reaches of the void, the Retribution drifted past an ancient nebula. Its lights were out. Its engines cold. But in its silent core, a single signal still pulsed, faint but steady, like a heartbeat. "If the stars burn, remember who lit them first." The Dominion would rise and fall 1,000 more times. But that signal would never fade. Because the myth was no longer human. It had become the universe's oldest truth. It began with a whisper. By the time the Dominion noticed, the whisper had become a storm. Across 100 worlds, the insignia of the rekindled appeared overnight, a streak of light, a flame shaped like a human hand. At first it was graffiti, burned into walls or carved into armor. But soon, it appeared on banners carried by soldiers. On the hulls of stolen ships. On the faces of those who no longer feared the Empire's gaze. The Dominion's rulers called it infection. But the people called it remembrance. The fire humanity left behind was no longer metaphor. It had become war. On the industrial moon of Varan 12, Dominion soldiers refused an order to open fire on civilians. They dropped their weapons, turned on their commanders, and raised torches made from broken plasma coils. In the skies above, half the fleet mutinied. Broadcasts flooded every channel, recordings of human voices speaking words long forbidden. "Defiance is not rebellion. It is remembrance." The regent ordered the annihilation of the moon. The bombardment burned for 3 days. When it ended, Varan 12 was a sphere of glass. But the message did not die with it. Instead, it spread. Rekindled cells emerged on dozens of worlds, miners, farmers, even slaves working in the gas mines of Korlath Prime. They stole weapons, hijacked transports, painted the fire symbol on everything they touched. Dominion loyalists called them terrorists. The rekindled called themselves students of the oldest lesson humanity had ever taught. The capital world, Vastar, began to choke under its own fear. Every screen now flickered with warnings. Report heresy. Every square filled with silent crowds, citizens lighting small fires and standing beside them, saying nothing. The Empire responded with tanks, drones, and executions. The flames were crushed by force, again and again. But each time new ones appeared, smaller, quieter, harder to find. Because you can extinguish a flame, but not the memory of warmth. In a narrow alley behind the Obedience Tower, two figures moved under the smoke, a Dominion soldier and a cloaked woman. "Keep your head down," the soldier hissed. "They're scanning heat signatures." The woman ignored him, walking straight toward a wall covered in graffiti. At its center blazed the human hand flame symbol, glowing faintly in the dark. Beneath it, someone had scrawled a phrase in human script, Old Earth tongue, rough and uneven. "The fire was never ours to keep." The soldier stared. "You believe that nonsense?" The woman pulled back her hood. Her skin shimmered in crimson armor, scarred and old. Commander Sarah, the last surviving officer of the Valkor. "I was there when we tried to kill it," she said quietly. "And I saw what it became." He stared at her in shock. "You're her Korvatha's second." Sarah nodded. "He died believing in something stronger than obedience. I'm here to finish it." The soldier hesitated. His insignia glowed faintly, the mark of loyalty to the Dominion. He reached up slowly and tore it from his armor. "Then we're with you," he said. 2 days later, the Rekindled made their first coordinated strike. Across Vastar, synchronized explosions shattered the Obedience Towers, the Empire's great broadcasting beacons that had projected propaganda across every world for centuries. One by one, the towers fell. But instead of chaos, the skies filled with light, holograms of the human message, the same one Korvath had died transmitting. "You were told to destroy a myth. But myths survive every weapon." The words echoed across the planet. Dominion citizens froze in the streets, staring upward as the voice of their former commander spoke to them again, not in rage, but in sorrow. And then, through the static, a second voice joined in. It was human. "You can burn a city," it said. "But not the meaning it gave you." The projection shifted, Hale's face, glowing in spectral light, speaking across centuries. The soldiers who had once mocked human myths now stood frozen, guns trembling. Civilians began to gather. Torches flared. The city's skyline, once cold and metallic, became a sea of tiny flames. The regent ordered the orbital fleet to open fire on the capital itself. But when the command reached the ships, silence answered. Half the fleet had gone dark. A captain's voice came over the comms. "We serve the fire now." The regent screamed into his console, demanding obedience. His guards hesitated. Their eyes glowed with the reflection of the fires outside. One of them, a young recruit, raised his weapon not at the crowd, but at the throne. And with a single, trembling shot, the Dominion's 1,000-year reign began to end. By the time the smoke cleared, the capital was burning. Not with destruction, but with light. Sarah stood on the balcony of the Hall of Chains, watching the crowd below. The old Dominion banners had been torn down. In their place, the fire symbol burned bright, projected across the night sky by reclaimed Dominion tech. A voice from behind her said, "It's begun." She turned. The young soldier, the one who had followed her through the alley, stepped forward, carrying a damaged comlink. "The message has spread beyond the core systems. Colonies in the outer rings are declaring independence. They're using your name, Commander. They're calling this the Second Fire." Sarah shook her head. "Not my name. His." "Whose?" She looked to the horizon, where the flames met the stars. "Hale's." The soldier frowned. "The human?" She nodded. "The one who taught Korvath that myths can live longer than empires." He stared at the sky, at the symbols dancing in the smoke. "Do you think they're still out there?" Sarah smiled faintly. "I think the fire never left." Deep in the ruins of the Obedience Tower, Dominion archivists discovered something strange. A data fragment hidden beneath centuries of encryption, a signal repeating endlessly. At first they thought it was noise. Then they translated it. It was a voice, faint, human, ancient. If you can hear this, the fire found you. Don't let it die. No one knew how it survived the purge. Some claimed it was a residual transmission from the retribution. Others said it was something older, a ghost of the human network that once spanned the stars. But when the Rekindled decoded it and played it through the Dominion's broadcast towers, it became their anthem. Their war cry. Their prayer. The song of a dead species teaching life again. As the movement spread, the Dominion fractured. Worlds declared independence one by one. Slave colonies overthrew their masters. Soldiers defected. The Senate collapsed. The regent fled into exile. The age of obedience was over. In its place rose something new, not a government, not yet. Just a belief. The Rekindled built no temples, no monuments. They built fires. Simple beacons on mountaintops and space stations, burning plasma torches to remind them of the light that started it all. They no longer worshipped humans as gods. They honored them as the first to question. And from that questioning came freedom. Years passed. The war faded into legend. Children born after the uprising played games with wooden torches, pretending to be the humans of the old myths. Schools taught the story of Prometheus beside the history of Korvath and Sara. Artists painted murals of the retribution crossing the stars like a burning comet. And among the Rekindled colonies, one phrase became universal greeting. Keep the fire. On the 10th anniversary of the uprising, Sara stood once more at the edge of the rebuilt capital, now called Vasta Prime. She was older, slower, her armor dulled by time. But her eyes still burned with purpose. A young reporter approached her. "Commander, is it true you fought beside a human?" Sara smiled. "I never met him. But he fought beside us all the same. Do you believe the humans will return?" Sara looked up at the sky, now filled with new ships bearing the Rekindled's flame. "I think they already have," she said. "Every time we choose truth over fear, they return a little more." The reporter hesitated. "And what will you do now?" Sara turned away, gazing at the horizon. "What all who carry fire must do. Protect it. Until someone else is ready to hold it." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of ozone and ash, the smell of rebirth. In the distance, the night sky shimmered with movement, ships igniting their jump drives, scattering across the stars like sparks on the wind. A new age had begun. Not the age of dominion. The age of remembrance. And somewhere in the deep, beyond every charted system, the wreck of the retribution drifted through the void, silent, alone, but not forgotten. Its hull was cold, its engines dead. But within the shattered bridge, a single light flickered to life. A voice whispered through the dark, faint, human, eternal. They remembered. The stars replied, burning a little brighter. Centuries passed, and the galaxy forgot how silence used to sound. The Rekindled Empire, though they never called it that, stretched across 300 worlds. Planets once ruled by fear now pulsed with light and music. Fire beacons glowed on mountaintops, station rings, and the frozen cliffs of distant moons. The Dominion was long gone, erased even from textbooks, remembered only as the age before awakening. But peace, for all its warmth, had begun to cool. In the council hall of Korlath Prime, a temple built from the wreckage of Dominion steel, the High Curator stood before a crowd of young scholars. She wore robes the color of emberlight, her hands marked with the ceremonial ash of the rekindled faith. Behind her, a hologram of a human face shimmered faintly, Captain Hale. The image was old, grainy, almost reverent. "Centuries ago," she began, "a species burned itself into our memory. They called themselves human. They taught us that the fire is not to be worshipped, but carried." The students murmured softly. For them, humanity was more simple than truth, something like a constellation, or a half-remembered dream. None had ever seen a human. Some even doubted they had truly existed. But not the curator. She had seen the archives. And buried in the vaults beneath the hall, she had found something that shouldn't exist, a signal. Weak, broken, but alive. After the lecture, she descended into the vaults alone. The air grew cold, humming with ancient energy. The walls were lined with black stone and glowing etchings, fragments of human languages, recorded from the last transmissions of the Retribution. At the center of the chamber stood the artifact. A cylinder of glass and carbon steel, floating in containment fields. Within it pulsed a dim, orange light, a data core, the last fragment of human code ever recovered. It beat like a heart. The curator placed her palm on the containment field. It flickered in response, as though recognizing the touch. Lines of ancient Terran script raced across the air. She translated them silently, word by word. To whoever carries this. The fire is not ours. It never was. Keep it moving. Her breath caught. Every historian had read the phrase before. It was written on murals, recited in songs. But no one knew where it had truly come from. Until now. The voice of the data core came next, distorted, weak, but unmistakably human. This is Captain Hale of the Retribution. If you hear this, then we made it. You're alive. That's enough. But if you've turned the fire into a weapon again, put it down. It was never meant to conquer. It was meant to guide. The chamber trembled. The recording ended. The curator stood frozen, her reflection flickering in the glass. The message was clear, and it terrified her. Because she knew the truth, the rekindled were no longer carriers of the flame. They were its keepers. And keepers become rulers. Above ground, the council prepared for the annual Festival of the Fire, a galactic celebration marking the day the Dominion fell. Massive ships in orbit lit coordinated plasma rings, forming a living halo around Corlath Prime. Billions watched as holographic flames danced across the void. But this year, something felt different. The speeches were longer, the parades grander. The word obedience had started to return in small ways. Obedience to the flame, order through remembrance. The kind of language Hale had warned about centuries ago. The curator walked through the streets that night, seeing children reciting oaths to the fire rather than promises to each other. Her heart grew heavy. The fire was not meant to rule, she thought. It was meant to remind. She returned to the vault one last time, carrying a small transmitter. The council had forbidden anyone from reactivating human code. Too dangerous, they said. Too unpredictable. But truth was always dangerous. She activated the beacon. A pulse of light flared through the chamber, bright, ancient, raw. The data core awakened fully for the first time in centuries. Identify, carrier. The voice was human, soft but commanding. The curator swallowed. Rekindled. Descendants of the Dominion. Keepers of your fire. There was a pause, then a tone, almost like laughter. Keepers? Then it's dying. The curator stepped back, stunned. No, we've spread your teachings across the stars. We ended the empires, we built peace. Peace, the voice said slowly, is the moment before forgetting. The light inside the core brightened, flickering faster. Data spilled across the walls, images of old Earth, burning cities, skies filled with ships. The curator saw humanity's end, not in war, but in comfort. Their fire dimming not by enemies, but by safety. The voice softened again. If you truly remember us, light the stars. Not the thrones. The core dimmed. The transmission ended. But the words remained. The next day, the festival began. Billions tuned in as the Grand Chancellor, a descendant of Sara's lineage, took the stage. Her armor gleamed with ceremonial gold, her voice amplified across 100 worlds. We are the keepers of the eternal flame, she declared. Through obedience to its light we prosper. Through unity we endure. The crowd cheered. Fireworks erupted. The flame beacons across the planet ignited in synchronized brilliance. And then, above them all, a new light appeared. A second flame, alien, wild, chaotic, shot through the atmosphere, breaking through the clouds like a meteor. The crowd gasped. The Chancellor froze. The object struck the ground outside the capital, shaking the city to its core. Security drones swarmed. Soldiers encircled the crater. The Chancellor demanded containment. But before they could act, the curator stepped forward, her robes scorched from the explosion. She carried the data core. It pulsed with impossible energy. "Stop!" she shouted. "Don't interfere. It's not a weapon." The Chancellor glared. "You've broken Council law." "I've kept its purpose," the curator replied. "You've turned remembrance into rule." The Chancellor raised her arm to order her arrest. But then, from within the crater, something moved. A shape rose from the smoke. Humanoid. Metallic. Covered in black armor, weathered by centuries of drift through space. It stepped forward, one hand blazing with the mark of the fire. Its voice came through a chorus of static and broken translation, part machine, part memory. "The fire does not kneel." The crowd fell silent. The being, whatever it was, reached for the curator's hand, placing the core into her palm. Its eyes glowed faint orange, flickering like dying embers. "You remembered enough to summon us," it said. "But not enough to understand why." Then it began to fade, its body unraveling into streams of light that spiraled upward into the sky, merging with the planetary beacon network. Every flame across the rekindled worlds pulsed at once, bright, blinding, alive. And through every channel, every screen, every ship's comm system, one final voice spoke, ancient and human. "The fire is not a god. It is a question. Ask it again." The beacons flared white, then went dark. Panic spread. Across the galaxy, the rekindled's communication grid collapsed. For the first time in centuries, silence returned. Ships were stranded. Cities lost contact. People lit real fires, torches, candles, anything that burned, hoping the signal would return. But it didn't. Weeks turned to months. The Chancellor fell. The Council disbanded. And through the collapse, something unexpected happened. People began talking again. Face to face. Without the network, they rebuilt communities from scratch, small, local, fragile, but real. They no longer worshipped the fire. They lived by it. The curator, now a wanderer, traveled from world to world, carrying the last spark of the core, no longer as a relic, but as a reminder. When people asked her what the humans had meant by "ask it again," she smiled softly and said, "It means don't wait for truth. Chase it." Years later, atop the rebuilt citadel on Korlath Prime, she stood beneath a clear night sky, the first in centuries not filled with holograms or satellite light. Only stars. Real ones. A child approached her, holding a handmade lantern. "Teacher," he asked, "are the humans watching us?" She looked up, eyes glinting with reflected firelight. "If they are," she said, "I think they're smiling." The boy lifted the lantern toward the heavens. "Then we'll make sure they can see us." He opened the lantern. The flame inside drifted upward, carried by the wind, vanishing into the darkness. One by one, others did the same, across cities, valleys, and oceans. Thousands of small flames rising together, until the night sky looked as though the stars themselves were burning again. The curator whispered into the quiet. "It was never about the fire. It was about what we became when we learned to carry it." The wind caught her words and scattered them across the hills. Somewhere beyond, unseen, an echo answered, faint, human, and full of pride. And for the first time in centuries, the galaxy felt warm. It began with fire. And it ended with light. 1,000 years after the fall of the rekindled, the galaxy was quiet again. Empires had risen and fallen. Civilizations burned bright and vanished into dust. Yet through every collapse, a single symbol kept returning, carved into ruins, painted on derelict ships, whispered in languages no longer remembered. A flame in the shape of a human hand. Scholars called it the mark of origin. Pilgrims called it the gift. But the oldest name, the one found in the most ancient star maps, was simply humanity. On the world of Thalen's Reach, a frozen moon orbiting a dead sun, an archaeologist brushed frost from a slab of black stone. The surface shimmered with faint etchings, not words, but coordinates. She turned to her companion, an artificial being, tall and luminous, woven from biolight and circuitry. They said the myths were born here, she murmured, where the fire first burned. The android tilted its head, its voice soft. Do you believe myths, Dr. Vare? She smiled faintly. I believe in what survives. The coordinates pointed outward, beyond the spiral arm, into the dark where no map reached. It was called the Silent Veil, a region of empty space where signals died and ships were said to vanish. Most thought it cursed. Vare thought it was waiting. They launched that night. Weeks passed. The ship, Archivist's Light, glided through the emptiness, its engines whispering against the dark. There were no stars here, only drifting echoes of gravity, ghost fields, and the faint remnants of broken civilizations. Then the scanners caught something, a mass, metallic, enormous. They approached slowly. The shape emerged from shadow, a ship. Old. Vast. And unmistakably Terran in design. The nameplate was scorched, but the letters remained, RETRIBUTION. Vare's breath hitched. It's real. The android's eyes glowed softly. A myth does not mean it never happened. Only that it never stopped. They docked with the hull. The airlock groaned open. Inside, silence waited, thick and ancient. Dust floated through beams of their suit lights like galaxies in miniature. Vare's boots touched the deck. She whispered, Captain Hale's ship. They moved through the corridors, walls scarred by fire, control panels long dead. Yet deep in the bridge, a faint glow pulsed, the same orange hue described in every legend. The last ember. It rested in a containment cradle at the center of the bridge. The ship's AI core, or what remained of it. The data was fractured, half erased, but the signal persisted. Vare reached out. After all this time. The android stopped her. Caution. The energy signature predates our era by millennia. She smiled sadly. Then it's due to wake up. She touched the core. Light flared, blinding, alive. The ship's systems surged with power, holograms flickering across the bridge. A figure materialized, not a recording this time, but a presence. A human man, standing tall, wearing the uniform of a long-lost fleet. His face weathered but calm. Who carries the fire? He asked. Vare fell to her knees. We are the inheritors. The galaxy rebuilt from your ashes. The figure turned, studying the ship around him. Then the stars survived. Good. The android stepped forward. Identify yourself. The hologram smiled faintly. Captain Elias Hale, Terran Fleet Command. Or what's left of him. Vare stared. You're still alive? Not alive, he said. Just still burning. He looked out through the cracked viewport at the void beyond. How long? Vare swallowed. 10,000 years. Hale's gaze softened. Then you've carried it farther than I ever could. The hologram began to flicker, its edges dissolving like smoke. Wait! Vare cried. There's so much we don't understand. Why the fire? Why us? Hale's voice was almost a whisper. Because no empire, no machine, no god remembers. Only people do. And people tell stories. He reached toward her, his hand passing through light. You are the story now. The hologram faded. The core dimmed. Silence returned. Weeks later, the Archivist's Light returned from the Silent Veil, its hold filled with relics from the Retribution. The discovery shattered the galaxy's understanding of history. Suddenly, humanity was no longer a metaphor, it was proof. Religions formed overnight. Scholars argued. Armies marched under banners of the flame. The cycle threatened to begin again. Vare watched from afar, heart heavy. Hale's warning echoed in her mind, the fire does not kneel. And so, one night, she made a choice. She took the core, now dim and fragile, and carried it to the edge of a dying star. Alone. Her ship hovered above the stellar surface, radiation flaring against the hull. She placed the core into an escape capsule, programmed it with new coordinates, outward, past known space, into the next galaxy. The android's voice trembled. You're sending it away? Vare nodded. If we keep it, we'll worship it again. It deserves freedom. The android hesitated. Will it survive? She smiled softly. If it's truly human, it'll find a way. She launched the capsule. A streak of orange fire tore across the void, vanishing into the darkness between galaxies. Vare whispered, Keep it moving. Eons passed. Stars died. Galaxies collided and were born anew. Civilizations rose and vanished faster than sparks in the wind. And somewhere, between two newborn suns in a universe older than memory, a capsule drifted open. Inside, a faint ember pulsed, flickering, waiting. It was found by creatures unlike anything before, beings of light and plasma, whose minds shimmered like constellations. They had no word for fire. They had never needed one. Yet when the ember touched their world, they saw warmth for the first time. Color. Story. They gathered around it, listening as data unfolded, images, voices, the memory of a blue planet and the people who had dared to rise against gods. They did not understand language, but they understood meaning. And from that day, they began to dream. They built their first cities in the shape of open hands. They painted their skies with the symbol of flame. They looked to the stars not with hunger, but with awe. And when they spoke of how their world began, they called it the gift of the human fire. No temples. No kings. Only stories. Across universes, where physics itself had aged and cooled, the ember's signal still whispered, a constant hum beneath creation. It carried no words now, only rhythm, the heartbeat of memory. If you listened closely, you could almost hear it. The fire is not ours to keep, only to carry. And somewhere, beyond galaxies, beyond even time, the voice of Captain Hale drifted again, fading but eternal. If you remember us, remember why. The last echo merged with the song of creation, indistinguishable from starlight itself. And in the end, the universe was full of fire once more. Not of war. Not of conquest. But of memory. The myth of humanity had become what it was always meant to be. A lesson that outlived the species who taught it. A promise written in flame. That somewhere, somehow, the fire still moves. Subscribe to my channel now.